Today I am bringing you my May reading wrap up. So we are going to be talking about I want to say 9 books that I read in May. May was a really good reading month, not in terms of volume, but in terms of quality. I read 3 5-star books in May, and I didn't really realise until I was planning out this video, but I read 3 5 stars, and considering I've only had like 8 or 9 5 stars this whole year so far, that's like a third of my 5 stars. So I'm really excited to talk about all of these books. I'm going to go in order of when I read them, except I'm going to save the series until the end. Not that I'm going to go into spoilers or anything, but I know that some people don't care about series, so it makes sense in my brain to save them until the end of the video. But timestamps will be in the description as usual, just in case you would like to skip around. The first book that I'm going to be talking about is The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier. So this had been on my radar for a while. I have read quite a few Jennifer Hillier books in the past, and generally I've enjoyed her writing. This was one of her earlier books, I think. I think the only 2 books I have left to read from her are Creep and whatever the sequel is to that. I can't remember the name of it. But this was one of the few Jennifer Hillier books that I hadn't read, and I moved it up my TBR because I heard Michaela from What Michaela Reads and Nat from Nerdy Nat Reads both read this recently and gave it a glowing review. So I was really intrigued and I read this. I listened to the audiobook on my drive to and from Wales over the bank holiday weekend right at the start of May, and I loved this. I was tempted to give it 5 stars, but I don't think it is a 5 stars. It's probably more like a 4.5, but I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. So this is a very dark thriller. If you like dark thrillers, then I really recommend it. If you don't like dark thrillers, then maybe give this one a miss. But in this, we are following a main character called Samantha, and let me tell you, it was so weird reading about a book where the main character has the same name as me, but we're following Samantha, who is convinced that her mother was killed by a serial killer. She was only a baby at the time, but if Sam is right, then it means that the police got the wrong man, because supposedly they captured this serial killer several years before her mom was killed. That, I think, is all you really need to know about the basic plot, but this is dark. It's one of the darkest thrillers I've read in a while. What I think Jennifer Hillier does so well in this book, though, is she gives you information in the beginning that the main character doesn't have. The problem that I sometimes have with thrillers is I find them predictable, and I can still enjoy a thriller even if I kind of guess what direction it's going in. But I would love it if more authors did this, where instead of trying to divert your attention when a twist is really, really obvious, I would rather they give you the information in the beginning but keep the main character in the dark. I feel like that builds more tension because you know that the main character is in danger in certain situations, but they don't. I found this really, really gripping. It was so tense in places. The main reason it didn't get 5 stars is because I think it was just a little too dark for me. It made me feel very uncomfortable in places, and there was a sexual assault scene which I don't think was necessary. Really didn't like the way that that was handled, but otherwise would recommend this if you like dark thrillers. And yeah, I only have 2 more books by Jennifer Hillier that I need to read before I've completed her backlist. Next up, I read Table for One by Emma Gannon, which is a very different vibe. This is contemporary fiction that follows a main character who has been with her boyfriend for, I think, about a decade. It might be even longer than that. They own a house together, they even work together, they set up a business together. However, he is dragging his heels on getting married and having kids, and she has made it very clear to him that that's the direction that she wants their relationship to go in. Very quickly, you see that this main character has lost a lot of herself in this relationship, and maybe she hasn't been treating her friends very well. And this is really a book about friendship and about pulling yourself together and working out what you really want out of life. I gave this 3 stars. I really did not like the main character, and the thing is, I think she was very realistically written. I know people like this main character. I found her really frustrating, and I couldn't relate to a lot of the way that she handled certain things, and also the way that she treated her friends I did not agree with. The plot sort of revolves around this article that the main character is writing, and in order to do this, she's spending a lot of time with someone who's a decade younger than her, who has very different views on relationships, and I just don't think that this was very satisfying. The growth that she goes through, it wasn't that satisfying to me, and even though I found it really compulsively readable and I wanted to keep on reading to find out what was going to happen, I just didn't love this one as much as I loved this author author's other book, which I gave 5 stars when I read it back in 2020, so would really recommend Olive. But this one I think was just okay. Next up I read Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney, which is a thriller. This is following a guy whose name I can't remember, but at the start of the book he's on the phone to his wife when she gets out of the car, she sees something in the road, so she gets out of the vehicle and she goes missing, and it's now a year later and she's still not being found. So we're following this guy who, he's a writer, he's struggling with writer's block, and his agent offers to send him to this remote Scottish island where he can hopefully get some inspiration. That's the setup. Honestly, in terms of the actual plot, it sounds like a lot of other thrillers. I remember hearing the plot and thought, okay, this sounds like something I've read before. I do really like the way that Alice Feeney writes atmosphere and the way that she builds a setting. This is the second book that I've read from her. The other book I've read is Rock, Paper, Scissors, and I remember really liking the setting and the atmosphere in that. Alice Feeney knows how to write an isolated setting. However, I hated the ending. Like, the rest of the book was great. I really liked the tension and how when this guy gets to this remote island, weird stuff is happening and you're not sure, is it all in his mind because he's not sleeping very well, or is there something sinister going on? And I really liked that back and forth and how it kept me on my toes. I just didn't like the ending. I am willing to suspend my disbelief a little bit, especially when it comes to thrillers, but this did not make sense. Like, the ending, when certain things are revealed, found it really unbelievable and it actually really made me angry. I can't remember what I rated this in the end. I think I gave it a 3 because the first half was a solid 4 stars, but the ending was like a 2. So I decided to average it out somewhere in the middle. But I don't think it's put me off from reading other books by Alice Feeney. I think she's well known for having some wild and really out there, unhinged plot twists, and this was definitely that. Next up I read My Grandmother Sends Her Regards and Apologies by Frederick Backman, and this is one of the books that I gave 5 stars this month. I really enjoyed this. I don't think it's a perfect book, and I'm going to talk about the issues that I had with it, but ultimately I think this was a very beautifully written, character-driven story. It has cemented Frederick Backman as one of my favourite authors. I mean, I already knew that before I read this book, but Frederick Backman just has a way with words. His writing is actually quite simple, but he just seems to understand humanity, and I really loved that. This really affected me, even though it didn't make me cry as much as A Man Called Uwe. It still made me cry and I felt quite emotional. So this is following a young girl called Elsa, who I believe is about 7 or 8, and you learn very early on, like in the beginning of the book, you learn a lot about the relationship that she has with her grandmother and how her grandmother is one of her only friends. It's never actually explicitly said in the book. Elsa is neurodivergent and her grandmother is very protective over her. They have this really special bond. However, you learn very early on in the first few chapters that Elsa's grandmother has cancer. The plot revolves around her grandmother leaves Elsa a trail of letters that she's meant to deliver to certain people, and this is really a book about how especially children sometimes don't really think about how the people in their lives have lives and relationships outside of the relationship that they have with you. I don't know whether I've explained that very well, but Elsa is realising for the first time that her grandmother wasn't just her grandmother, she was also her mom's mom. She also worked as a doctor, she worked a lot overseas and had a big impact on other people, and it's about Elsa fully appreciating that for the first time. Like I said, it's very character driven and I loved this. The only thing I didn't love, first of all, this has a lot of pop culture references, and especially Elsa is obsessed with Spider-Man, the Marvel comics, and also Harry Potter, so those are mentioned constantly throughout just as a warning, because pop culture references don't usually bother me that much, but it felt like a lot in this book. Also, there's this make-believe world that Elsa's grandmother makes up to comfort Elsa. That was really sweet, but there were parts where it felt like it was just going off on a bit of a tangent, and I didn't really care about this make-believe world. So those parts felt a bit like they were dragging, but otherwise I gave this 5 stars and I will continue to read books by Frederick Backman. I'm really excited to pick up his new release, which I think comes out this month. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch was the next book that I picked up, and this was also 5 stars. This messed with my mind. So if you don't know, this is a sci-fi thriller that follows a guy called called Jason, and I don't want to say too much about the beginning of this book because I was not expecting certain things to happen, but essentially something happens to him right in the first chapter, and when he wakes up, he finds that his life isn't his own. He's no longer married, he no longer has a teenage son, and he's no longer a physics teacher, he's actually a famous scientist. The book then goes from there, and it's about his desperation and his drive to return to his family. It feels a bit like an action movie, and I really enjoyed this. It's not the kind of thing that I would usually pick up, but I had a few people recommend this to me. I think it's been since adapted into a TV show, and I'm really curious to check that out. It was full of action and adrenaline. I listened to the audiobook and it kept me engaged the whole way through. There were loads of twists and turns, and I feel like I went on a real journey with this book. If you're nervous about it being a sci-fi thriller, do not panic. If you've ever seen a Marvel movie, then I think you'll be okay with the level of science in this, to the point where I think if you're reading this because you want a sci-fi novel, I think you might end up being disappointed. This, in my opinion, is a thriller. What's really interesting is I was listening to this on my way home from work, and I got to a point where honestly, it was messing with my mind, and I thought, whoa, okay, this has gone from being a solid 4 stars to a 5. And I got home and I was talking to my partner about this because he's read this book before, so he didn't mind me sharing spoilers. And I told him the part that I was at and how much I was enjoying it, and he said, yeah, that's the part that I didn't like. So I just thought that was really interesting, how what made this a 5 stars for me made it not a 5 stars for him. I think he still gave it 4 stars in the end. But yeah, I would really recommend this if you're looking for something that's really fast-paced and that's very plot-driven. This was fantastic in my opinion, and yeah, it's one of my favourite books of the year so far. Gave it 5 stars, might have already said that. Unfortunately, the next book that I read wasn't a 5 stars, which was really disappointing because I was reading it for the same vlog where I read Dark Matter. I did a whole reading vlog where I was reading until I found a 5-star thriller, and this next book, I wouldn't even say it's a thriller, it's more of a mystery, but I did read With a Vengeance by Riley Sager, which is his newest release. It comes out in June. I had an advanced copy through NetGalley, and the thing is, the first half of this book was fantastic. I was really gripped, I really loved the atmosphere, and yeah, it was a little bit silly. It reminded me quite a bit of the movie Clue, if you've ever seen that. It was a little over the top, but I was really gripped and I was really intrigued to find out what direction it was going to go in. We're following a few different characters, but the main character is called Anna, and her father owned a train company. However, something happened around 12 years ago that ruined her family, and she is looking to bring to justice the people that she holds responsible. I thought this was going to be a revenge story, and it is. Like, revenge is a big element within the plot. However, Anna is not like a strong character in my opinion. She very quickly loses control of the situation. She brings together this group of people on this train that's traveling from Philadelphia to Chicago overnight, but in the prologue you learn that there might be a killer on board. So I really liked the setup for this. I liked the 1950s setting. There were some twists that I didn't see come in, however it really lost me towards the end. Riley Sager does this thing sometimes. There was just too many twists in my opinion. I was just getting whiplash. I think I would have enjoyed this more if it had just focused on a few really solid twists instead of just one after the other after the other. So yeah, I didn't love the ending. Gave this one like a 3 to a 3.5. It wasn't bad. It's not my least favourite Riley Sager, but it's also not my favourite, and I found it a bit underwhelming. I do have a full spoiler-free review for this, so I'll leave that video linked if you want to learn more. Moving on to some sequels that I read in May, and first up we have Human Remains by Joe Callahan, which is the 3rd book in the Cat and Lock series. This is one of my favourite crime thriller series. If you love a good police procedural, would really recommend this series. I've been listening to it on audio, which I've been loving. It's set in Warwickshire, which isn't that far from me, and the narrator puts on Midlands accents for the different characters, and it just feels really comforting. We don't get many books set in the West Midlands, so whenever I find a series that's written by a local author as well, I get excited. But as I said, this is the 3rd book in the series, and we're following this detective called Kat Franks, who in the first book, she's paired up with this AI detective. It's part of a pilot study to see whether these AI detectives can help the police and whether they can have like a positive impact on the way that they conduct investigations. And Kat initially is very hesitant, but what I think this series does well is it talks about the limitations of AI while also talking about how, for example, this AI detective called Locke, he can immediately, like within a few seconds, scan a bunch of social media accounts that would take a human detective days to do. So it's not like one-sided. It feels like a very balanced approach. And yeah, I gave the first 2 books 4 stars, but this was 5 stars. The ending got me. I was not expecting Joe Callahan to really go there with the ending, and yeah, so excited for the next book in this series because there is going to be a next one. There has to be a next one. The final 2 books that I have to talk about, I'm not actually sure whether I mentioned I was reading Tower of Dawn in my April wrap-up because I started this right at the end of April and then I finished it at the beginning of May, but I then read Kingdom of Ash in its entirety in May, so I finished the Throne of Glass series and I feel like I've been on a journey with this series. I read the first book for the first time back in 2021 and then I restarted the series in September or October last year. I liked this series. I actually, if you've read this series and you want my spoilery thoughts, I have a reading vlog that's over an hour long. I tried to cut it down, okay? I couldn't cut it down any further, but if you're interested in my spoilery thoughts, that video is also chaptered, so you can find out my thoughts on each book if there's one that you're more interested in hearing me talk about, but I'll leave that video linked just in case anyone happens to be interested in. But in terms of my spoiler-free thoughts on this series, I don't know whether this is controversial, but Tower of Dawn was my favourite book in this series. This focuses on my favourite character, and they're not my favourite character because I agreed with every decision that they made, but to me this character felt like the most human, and I was so confused reading the series because I'd heard so many people say that they hated this character. So I was expecting them to do something unforgivable, and I didn't have that experience. So Tower of Dawn was my favourite. This, you can't read it if you haven't read the rest of the series, in my opinion, because you wouldn't understand the context, but this I think is a beautiful love story and I really liked the characters in this, the old characters and also the new characters that are introduced. Kingdom of Ash I thought was a good end to the series, but I didn't think it was the most satisfying. I felt like everything wrapped up too neatly, and that's all I'm gonna say. So yeah, I think I gave this 4 stars, but Tower of Dawn was 5 stars. Absolutely loved this. That does bring me to the end of this video though, so thank you for watching if you made it this far. I feel like this hasn't taken me as long as I was expecting to film, so I'm really nervous that I've forgotten a book. But let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know what was your favourite book that you read in May. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me, but otherwise I will see you next time. Bye.